Dragon Ball's next generation. Oh man, how did we get here? Gohan, Goten, Trunks, Pan, Uub, a generation that for a brief moment looked like they were going to carry the torch and shape the future of Dragon Ball. However, that most certainly did not happen. The next generation was sidelined, underwritten, and in some cases completely forgotten. And whether you realized it or not, it left a hole in the story that still felt to this day. But it didn't have to be that way. In fact, Dragon Ball spent years building up this new generation, handing them the keys to the future, only to slam the door in their faces and give the keys back to Goku. And I want to talk about how that happened, why it happened, and what it cost the story along the way. Let's start with Gohan, because Gohan's story is where it all began. During the Cell games. Well, we all know what happened. Goku fought Cell, pushed himself to the limit, and then stepped back. For the first time, Goku gave up. He willingly let his son, a kid who never wanted to fight, step into the spotlight and finish the battle. And Gohan did. He transformed, he surpassed his father, and he unleashed that hidden rage that had been bubbling under the surface since the Saiyan Saga and absolutely obliterated Cell. That final Kamehameha with Goku behind him in spirit wasn't just cool, it was poetic. It was Toriyama literally and symbolically handing the story over to Gohan. And at the time, Toriyama meant it. He said in interviews that he intended to put Gohan into the leading role. But it didn't last. When we got to the Buu Saga, for a while, it seemed like we were still on that path. Gohan was the main character still. Older now, awkward, dorky, and trying to balance his studies with being Earth's strongest warrior. And the series introduced Videl, a human fighter and Gohan's love interest. But honestly, she's one of the more wasted characters in the next generation conversation. She trained, she fought, she learned how to fly. She wanted to be part of that world. But like everyone else, she got quietly shuffled off to the sidelines. Looking back, I think part of the reason Toriyama tried to make Gohan the lead wasn't just because he wanted to pass the torch. It's because he wanted to take the story back to something a little lighter, something closer to the gag manga roots Dragon Ball originally had. And Gohan, being awkward, bookish, and non-confrontational, was the perfect character for that. You can see it plain as day in the early parts of the Buu Saga. It wasn't about world-ending threats at first, it was about Gohan navigating high school life, hiding his powers, fighting crime as the Great Saiyaman. It was goofy, intentionally silly, and that wasn't an accident. Even Goten and Trunks, when they were introduced, were written more like pranksters than future warriors. Goten in particular was basically a mini Goku, but even more childish and carefree, filling that void while Goku was dead. Trunks was the same, cocky, mischievous, always looking for a fight, but in a playful, unserious way. But here's the thing, while some fans appreciated the Great Saiyaman arc's comedic tone, many expected the series to return to what they were used to. They wanted battles, stakes, the kind of fights that defined Dragon Ball Z in the first place. And whether it was fan expectation, pressure from editors, or Toriyama's own uncertainty, it's clear that the story couldn't stay small and lighthearted for long. So the Buu Saga course corrected. It introduced an overarching villain. It brought back Goku and Vegeta, and it slowly, quietly pushed Gohan out of the spotlight. Toriyama even admitted later it didn't work out. I felt that compared to Goku, Gohan was ultimately not suited for the part. He wasn't wrong, Gohan isn't Goku. He doesn't have the same love for battle, the same hunger to improve, and maybe that's why fans didn't latch onto him the way they did Goku. But before we dive into the next generation, I've got a quick story of my own. So I was Googling my name recently just out of curiosity, and what popped up honestly freaked me out. Sites I'd never heard of were listing my name, email, phone number, even old addresses I haven't used in years. I felt like I was being tracked by the Red Ribbon Army or something. That's when I found Aura, today's sponsor, and honestly, I'm glad I did. Aura scans the internet to find out where your personal info is floating around and gets it removed for you. No tech headaches, no signing up to weird sites, no filler villains in customer support, just clean, effective protection. And unlike Yamcha's win record, Aura actually keeps you safe moving forward. They've got dark web monitoring, fraud alerts, a built-in VPN, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. Because the only thing worse than getting absorbed by Cell is having your bank account absorbed in real life. Want to see where your info's hiding? Hit up aura.com/KeyReviews for a 14-day free trial. That's aura.com/KeyReviews. Anyway, speaking of getting sidelined, that decision didn't just affect Gohan, it created a ripple effect that sidelined the entire next generation. Because after Gohan's defeat at Buu's hands, we got Goten and Trunks, mini Saiyan prodigies who could turn Super Saiyan before they even hit puberty. When they first showed up, it felt like the start of something, a new dynamic, a new future. Instead, they were turned into comic relief. Toriyama himself said it, "I always liked dumb gags, so I made things comical with Gotenks." And I'll be honest with you, I've never been the biggest fan of Gotenks. Sure, he's funny sometimes, but because he's so goofy, the tension never really lands for me. It's hard to feel like the fate of the world is on the line when the guy fighting is busy showing off and making jokes mid-battle. And when the dust finally settled, when the Buu saga was over, what were Goten and Trunks left with? Nothing. They didn't have an arc, they didn't grow, they didn't step into the roles the story seemed like it was setting up for them. They became background characters, comic relief, side players in a story that kept moving further and further away from them. And the worst part is not only did Gotenks fail to leave any lasting impact on the story, but his entire existence came at the cost of Goten and Trunks' individual development. The fusion became the character, and Goten and Trunks, their personalities, their struggles, their potential, were sacrificed for the sake of a gimmick. And when Dragon Ball Super rolled around, it only got worse. They stayed frozen in time, literally. They seemed like they barely aged. They stopped being relevant. Any setup they had in Z was quietly erased in favor of more Goku and Vegeta. Then there's Pan. Pan was supposed to be the next generation, the symbol that the story would continue. And when Dragon Ball GT started, she was front and center. She was spunky, brave, and capable. But the way she was written tells you everything about how Dragon Ball treats its next generation. In interviews, GT's producers admitted they deliberately made Pan weaker. They said it would break the story's pattern to make Pan strong. She was there to be rescued. Think about that. They had a character who could have grown into a new kind of hero, and they purposely kept her small. Not because of story reasons, not because of power scaling, but because they wanted to keep the spotlight on Goku. And then finally, we get to Uub. Maybe the most tragic case of all. Uub was introduced at the very end of Z, the reincarnation of Kid Buu, but with a pure heart, a shy, timid kid from a poor village. Goku fights him at the World Martial Arts Tournament, smiles, and says, "I'm going to train you." That was supposed to be the start of something new. The clearest passing of the torch in the entire series. And then, nothing. Toriyama ended the manga there. GT picked up the baton and tried to do something with Uub, but even there, he was quickly pushed aside. He got one good fight, one fusion moment, and then faded away like the others. And it's not even just Goten, Trunks, Pan, Uub, or Gohan either. If we're talking about the next generation, what about Bulla? Vegeta's daughter. She barely existed outside of being a background character. Or Marin, Krillin and 18's kid. They were both basically reduced to cameos in GT. So why? Why did Dragon Ball build up this entire next generation only to throw them all away? The answer isn't complicated, it's painfully simple. Shueisha, Toei Animation, the entire Dragon Ball machine eventually learned a tough lesson. Whenever the focus shifted too far from Goku, the audience didn't always follow. Toriyama tried to make Gohan the lead after the Cell Saga, but even he admitted later that it didn't work the way he'd hoped. And during Dragon Ball GT, when the series leaned into Pan and Trunks as leads alongside Goku, they weren't received well. Ratings slid, merch sales declined, and so, like clockwork, the story circled back to Goku, back to what was familiar. Whether it was fan expectations, business pressures, or creator comfort, one thing became clear: Dragon Ball struggled to let the new generation blossom. And that's what makes this whole thing so tragic, because the next generation wasn't forgotten by accident. it was abandoned on purpose. We lost the chance to watch Gohan step into the role he was always meant for. We lost Goten and Trunks' story, not as the next fighters, but as kids trying to grow out of their father's shadows. We lost Pan's potential to be something new. We lost Uub's journey from poor village kid to Earth's greatest defender. All of that was left behind because Dragon Ball, at its core, couldn't move past Goku. And don't get me wrong, I love Goku. I grew up watching him, and he's still my favorite anime character to this day. But the saddest thing about this whole situation is that Dragon Ball once dared to ask, what happens after the hero's story ends? And then it ran away from the answer. Hopefully, this mistake won't be continued since Dragon Ball Super's Pan is a promising character so far, and Uub seems like he'll be a lot stronger than what we originally thought. But if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe. Join us as a channel member for special perks, and check out some of my other videos. See you there.